Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we are diving into a story that is crazier than any primetime drama you have ever seen. And trust me, I have covered a lot of wild stuff on this channel. We are talking about Vietnam's high-speed rail obsession. This is the project that the entire country has been dreaming about, drooling over, and fighting about for more than 20 years. It is a saga full of broken promises, billion-dollar ghost deals, nationalist tantrums, and enough plot twists to make Hollywood jealous. So grab your popcorn because this ride is going to be bumpy. Let us start at the very beginning. The Vietnamese have been shouting from the rooftops for 2 decades that they want a high-speed railway connecting Hanoi in the north to Ho Chi Minh City in the south, the country's political heart and its economic engine. They drew up gorgeous blueprints over and over again. They stacked planning reports higher than any person. They held endless seminars with experts, academics, and consultants who all nodded wisely and said, yes, this is the future. But guess what? Nothing happened. Funding fell through. Technology was out of reach. And the internal political infighting was so brutal that it made our own congressional hearings look like a polite tea party. For 20 long years, the Vietnamese people heard only footsteps on the stairs, but never saw anyone come down. Their hopes slowly turned cold, from burning optimism to almost total despair. You could feel their frustration through the screen. They were waiting and waiting and waiting some more while their leaders talked and never delivered. Then came 2024. And suddenly, a glimmer of hope, the Vietnamese National Assembly finally bit the bullet and passed an official investment resolution for the North-South High-Speed Rail project. They formally approved it. The whole country erupted in celebration. Media outlets went completely bonkers, running nonstop coverage as if construction would break ground the very next morning. The mood was electric. People were dancing in the streets, posting excited videos online, and genuinely believing that their long national nightmare was finally over. And then in June 2025, they received what looked like a golden ticket. An American company reportedly made a verbal pledge to invest $100 billion into the project. Can you imagine that? $100 billion with a B. That is more than the entire GDP of many countries. The Vietnamese were over the moon. They thought their high-speed rail dream was finally within reach. Right there, practically touching their fingertips, government officials gave triumphant speeches, newspapers ran extra editions, everyone was high on hope. But here's where the fairy tale turns into a nightmare. 6 months later, that mysterious American firm went completely off the grid. Zero communication, no phone calls, no emails, no nothing. That $100 billion commitment evaporated into thin air as if it had never existed in the first place. No explanation, no closure, just silence. It was a farce of epic proportions, and it made Vietnam the laughingstock of the entire international community. The embarrassment was so deep you could feel it through the screen. Their so-called American partner turned out to be a ghost, and the Vietnamese were left holding an empty bag. You could almost hear the collective groan from Hanoi to Ho Chi Minh City. Now, you would think that would be the end of it, right? Wrong. Just 1 month later, the plot twisted harder than a pretzel. Vietnam's richest man, Pham Hat Vuong, and his conglomerate Vingroup suddenly stepped into the spotlight with a grandiose announcement. They had signed a comprehensive strategic partnership with German industrial giant Siemens. They were going to team up and capture the North-South rail deal together. And oh boy, did the Vietnamese media go nuts. It was celebration on steroids, drums beating, fireworks blasting, front page headlines screaming in giant fonts. The official Vietnam news agency acted like they had just won the World Cup. One headline actually boasted, and I am quoting here, head held high. German technology defeats competitors. And who were those competitors? No prizes for guessing. China, the massive neighbor to the north, the country that Vietnam loves to treat as its imaginary rival. This was framed as a geopolitical victory, a moment of national redemption, a declaration that Vietnam could succeed without Beijing's help. The public ate it up like candy. They were so proud, so full of themselves, that you would have thought they had already built the thing. And let me tell you, the Vietnamese public went absolutely berserk. Every street corner buzzed with excitement. Social media platforms exploded with patriotic rants and triumphant memes. To them, this was not just about a railway. This was Vietnam's industrial revolution, their golden ticket to the developed world, and undeniable proof that they could pull off mega infrastructure without relying on China. Their national pride shot through the roof. Some commentators even started talking about dominating Southeast Asia and reshaping the entire Indochina Peninsula. The ambition was staggering, maybe even delusional, but hey, when you are on a high, you do not think clearly. They were drunk on their own hype. And frankly, it was a little embarrassing to watch from the outside. But you know what they say? If something can go wrong, it will. And in just over a week, Vietnam gave the entire planet a masterclass in how to crash from euphoria to devastation in 8 days flat, faster than any roller coaster I have ever ridden. On December 25th, Link-Up Group dropped a bombshell announcement. They were officially withdrawing their investment application for the North-South High-Speed Rail project. Their official excuse, they said they wanted to focus on other things, stadiums, steel plants, and new energy projects. Sounded nice and reasonable on paper, but every single person with half a brain knew that was pure BS. This was a gut punch that sent the whole country spiraling from cloud 9 straight down to rock bottom in a single emotional nosedive. It was brutal to watch. 1 week they were celebrating. The next they were mourning, and the backlash was immediate and savage. Vietnamese netizens flooded every forum, Facebook group, and Twitter thread, unleashing their fury on Pham Hut Vuong. They called him a traitor, a sellout, a fraudster, a national disgrace, a modern-day villain. The insults were so vicious you would think he had personally burned down their houses. People were screaming for his head, demanding investigations, and calling for boycotts of his companies. Meanwhile, the stock market reacted in kind. Vingroup shares tanked instantly, hitting the daily limit down. Pham's personal net worth took a catastrophic hit, $1.9 billion wiped out in a single trading session. That is almost 60 billion new Taiwan dollars, enough to make even Wall Street traders gasp. It was a financial bloodbath. And you could almost hear the cash registers crying now. Here is the million-dollar question: how does a billionaire play a game worth tens of billions of dollars like a kid's board game? Why sign a flashy deal with Siemens if you are not fully committed? Backing out so quickly makes a complete mockery of both corporate credibility and national trust. But if you dig deeper, the answer is painfully clear. It is all about money. Pham Hut Vuong is a razor-sharp operator. He knew better than anyone that this high-speed rail line is a bottomless pit. Whoever jumps in gets swallowed whole, bones and all. The line stretches 1,540 kilometers with a total budget of $67.3 billion. That is over 2 trillion new Taiwan dollars. Several years worth of Vietnam's entire state revenue. Pham proposed that his company put up only 20% equity while the central bank would cover the remaining 80% via a 35-year, zero-interest loan. That is basically free money with no strings attached. His game plan was crystal clear: take the project, bring in German tech, claim all the credit and public glory, but offload virtually all financial risk onto the state and let the government bail him out if anything went south. Slick, right? Absolutely textbook corporate maneuvering. He was playing the system like a fiddle, and he almost got away with it. In other words, Vgroup's high-profile signing with Siemens was nothing but a well-orchestrated performance. A calculated piece of theater designed to whip up nationalist sentiment and pressure the government into conceding to his financing demands. It was a classic bait and switch, using German engineering as a prop to extract maximum concessions from Hanoi. But the government did not bite. The central bank and the finance ministry are not idiots. They saw through the stunt immediately. Think about it. If the railway succeeds, all the profit and glory go to Pham. If it fails, the hundreds of billions in bad debt fall squarely on the backs of Vietnamese taxpayers. That is a black hole no one can afford to fill, especially considering Vietnam's entire 2024 state revenue was less than $80 billion. How could they possibly plug that gap? They simply could not. It was never going to happen. And here's the kicker: just 2 days before the pullout, the central bank issued a scathing internal assessment, making it absolutely clear that Pham's demands were beyond the country's fiscal capacity. His group was already drowning in debt with leverage ratios through the roof. No bank in their right mind would underwrite that kind of risk. Once the government officially rejected his financing scheme, Vuong jumped ship without a second thought. It was textbook damage control, lightning fast, cold-blooded, and ruthlessly efficient. Sure, his reputation took a hit and the stock crashed. But that beats being buried under tens of billions in debt and ending up in financial ruin. Two old foxes trying to outfox each other, and in the end, neither really won. It was a stalemate, a classic case of mutual assured destruction in the boardroom. At that point, the Vietnamese government had no choice but to put on a brave face. They went on television and claimed that one company's withdrawal would not affect the 2026 bidding process. Smooth talk. right? But anyone with half a brain knew the truth. If the richest man in the country cannot make it work, what other local player could possibly take on this toxic asset? That is pure fantasy, wishful thinking at its finest. They were essentially crossing their fingers and hoping for a miracle, which is not a strategy, it is a prayer. So fast forward to 2026 with the main North-South project completely deadlocked, the government pivoted. Their new strategy, if they could not eat the whole elephant, maybe they could at least chew on a smaller piece, get some quick wins to show the public, and save face. That gave rise to a major event in April. On April 12th, Vietnam's first inter-regional high-speed line from Hanoi to Quang Ninh Thanh officially broke ground, complete with all the pomp and ceremony you would expect from a regime desperate for good news. The route is roughly 120 kilometers long, starting from Hanoi and passing through Bac Ninh Tai Phong before ending in Quang Ninh province, which directly borders China's Fangsheng city in Guangxi. The strategic location is impossible to ignore. It sits right on China's doorstep, practically in its backyard. That is no accident. Now here's where it gets really interesting. The lead investor is a company called V-Speed, which, surprise, surprise, is part of Vingroup, Phams empire. After tough negotiations with multiple parties, they sealed a so-called deep partnership with Siemens. The model looks flashy on paper. Local group takes the lead. Siemens supplies cutting-edge train platforms, signaling systems, and communications gear. And here is a major twist. They are ditching Vietnam's old narrow gauge tracks in favor of the standard 1,435 millimeter gauge, with a top speed of 350 kilometers per HR. That is world-class specification. Notably, no Chinese firm was involved at any stage, not even a whisper of Chinese participation. They were excluded completely, deliberately, almost obsessively. But if you dig beneath the glossy surface, Pham is still walking a tightrope over a canyon of risk. One slip and he is gone for good. The project's total cost is about $5.59 billion, over 170 billion new Taiwan dollars. After deducting $380 million in government-funded land acquisition costs, V-Speed is only putting up around $840 million in equity. The rest, debt financing from international markets in a high-interest rate global environment. Raising several billion dollars over 2 to 3 years for a rail project with glacial payback periods is financial suicide. It is like dancing on the edge of a cliff with a blindfold on. The interest payments alone could sink them before a single track is laid. Now, here is the question every rational observer should be asking, logically speaking, for a line that runs straight to the Chinese border and is meant to capture massive cross-border trade benefits. Chinese high-speed rail technology is by far the most cost-effective choice. It is basic common sense. Estimates show China's proposal runs about $27 to $30 million per kilometer, which is 20 to 30% cheaper than European, American, or Japanese alternatives, while cutting construction time by 3 to 5 years. Time is money. Every year earlier means a year of revenue and economic return. A child could do the math and financing. While China's export credit rates are slightly higher than Japan's official development assistance, the lower overall construction cost actually reduces the total repayment burden. Plus, China offers turnkey solutions, fast, proven, reliable. And Chinese gauge standards align perfectly with Vietnam's geography and operational needs. It is a match made in heaven. But Vietnam will not bite. They would rather go to Germany, even if it means getting fleeced by their own people, than turn to the construction giant next door. Why? Because they are desperate to prove they can succeed without China, a national ego so fragile and paranoid that it has become almost pathological. It is not about economics, it is about optics. They would rather pay more and get less just to avoid admitting that their giant neighbor has something valuable to offer. And then there is that classic Cold War style paranoia. What if the railway uses Chinese standards and one day relations sour and the People's Liberation Army can roll tanks straight into Hanoi? Give me a break. What is this, the 1950s, who relies on trains for invasion anymore? DF ballistic missiles are way faster and way more effective. That kind of thinking is stuck in the last century, completely out of touch with modern military reality. It is fear-based decision-making, not strategy. Now, from Vietnam's perspective, what would it take for Chinese firms to join this grand project? Brace yourself, because the terms they demand are absolutely insane. First, China must front all the capital, hundreds of billions of dollars up front, build the entire thing, and then wait for Vietnam to pay back over decades. That is called taking all the risk with zero security. Second, ultra low interest, preferably zero interest loans, because who does not love free charity? And third, and this is the real kicker, China must transfer all core technology and know-how, train local supply chains, and help Vietnam build its own domestic rail industry so they can eventually manufacture their own trains. They want the fish. The fishing rod and the entire boat factory. This is not a business deal. It is a wish list. They are treating China like Santa Claus, and it is frankly embarrassing to watch. It is the kind of demand that would get laughed out of any serious negotiation room in the world. Compare that to neighboring Laos. The contrast is night and day. Laos may be poor, but their attitude is spot on. They came to the table humble, proactive, and realistic. The Lao deputy prime minister once got choked up in an interview, saying, "The China-Laos railway was not China's idea. It was ours. We would sell our last pot and pan to build it." That is genuine commitment. They did not have much, so they put up their power grid equity as collateral, forming a joint venture with China Southern Power Grid. That is real skin in the game, real sacrifice, and they listened to professional advice. Laos initially wanted a 200-kilometer per HR line, but Chinese experts advised that given the mountainous terrain, small population, and economic scale, 160 kilometers per HR with mixed passenger freight service was far more practical. No ego, no resistance, just pure respect for expertise. Now, the China-Laos Railway has transformed Laos from a landlocked backwater into a connected hub of Indochina. Vientiane is bustling. Agricultural exports are flowing into China, and local living standards have visibly improved. That is tangible, measurable benefit. Laos got it right because they checked their pride at the door. Vietnam, on the other hand, they have got no money, no technology, no appetite for risk. And yet they are trying to play three-dimensional chess, pitting Japan against Germany, South Korea, and even India, who cannot even build their own high-speed rail, just to create an illusion of competition. They want to squeeze China into handing over crown jewels in sweetheart financing. It is transparent, it is cynical, and it is frankly pathetic. They are bluffing with a handful of twos and hoping nobody calls. Even in June, they keep up this charade. At the recent Asian High-Speed Rail Conference, Korean and German firms teamed up with Vietnamese conglomerates for another theatrical performance. One group, Truong Hai, claimed they would raise $59.1 billion, bring in Korean technology, and make trains 100% locally built. Sure, where's the cash coming from? Meanwhile, Siemens, riding the wave from the Kwangning deal, was hyping European signaling systems, as if victory was already guaranteed. Suddenly, media outlets were declaring China and Japan completely out, and the $67 billion deal locked in by Germany and Korea. Done deal, except it is not. Because here is the cold, hard reality. Vietnam has not even finished tendering for feasibility studies and consulting services. Half the geological surveys are incomplete. You cannot sign a contract without even basic prep work. That is infrastructure 101. The Vietnamese government is hiding behind the curtain, letting foreign firms act as pawns in a psychological warfare campaign to pressure China and Japan. Sound familiar? That is exactly what China itself did 2 decades ago, pitting Siemens, Alstom, Kawasaki, and Bombardier against each other to drive prices down and force technology transfers. Vietnam is trying to copy that playbook, but here is the difference. China had real aces, a massive domestic market, thousands of kilometers of railway potential, robust fiscal power, and genuine bargaining chips. Vietnam. Its territory is a narrow strip, barely 50 kilometers wide at its skinniest point, meaning no network effect, just a single line running top to bottom, maybe 1,500 kilometers max. That is too small to justify a dedicated production line. No economies of scale whatsoever. Plus, their industrial base is so weak they can barely manufacture a screw. What are they going to do with full-scale rail technology? Give them blueprints and they still could not build it. And let us not forget Vietnam's international credit. It is a black hole. Who wants to be the next victim of a default? Nobody with any sense. Now, some people ask, could Vietnam turn around, genuinely court China, and get the same treatment as Laos? Absolutely not. Do not even dream about it. Remember the Catlin-Ha Dong metro line in Hanoi that was built by China Railway 6th Group, 13 kilometers long. It started in 2011 and did not open until 2021, 10 full years. That is 1.3 kilometers per year which is just slightly faster than American infrastructure projects. And we all know how painfully slow those are. But it was not the contractor's fault. The Chinese crew went through hell worse than any construction nightmare I have ever heard of. First, land acquisition issues. All the equipment arrived, but the government had not even secured the land. Years of delays from widow protests, village rallies, and legal battles. Then came the local bureaucracy, fire safety, environmental checks, health permits. Every official with a stamp wanted a cut. It was like running a gauntlet. Then 2014 hits, and anti-China riots erupt over the South China Sea drilling platform issue. Construction crews had to work while dodging violence and worrying about their personal safety. To make it worse, Vietnamese officials would show up, point fingers at Chinese workers, and blame them for the delays on national television, total gaslighting. Finally, when the job was done, Vietnam pulled out its specialty. Default, they refused to accept the work, would not pay, and demanded third-party inspections by French experts. Just to cause trouble, the French team came, ran tests, and found everything up to standard. Total embarrassment for Vietnam, but they were not done. They demanded the contractor pay them $50 million as a test fee to prove the line could run. Are you kidding me? So after all that, China basically lost money, got no goodwill, and was slammed by Vietnamese media as incompetent. Lose-lose. It was a masterclass in how not to treat a business partner, and they do not just do this to China. Japanese firms building metro lines got the same treatment, 12-year projects, cost overruns by 60%, legal battles, endless disputes, and lawsuits that are still dragging on. So guess what? Siemens is happy to sell technology, but will not touch financing with a 10-foot pole. Japan shows up at conferences, but will not open its wallet. Once bitten, twice shy. Everyone has learned the hard way. The Vietnamese government has burned so many bridges that nobody trusts them anymore. At the end of the day, with Vietnam's reputation as a credit black hole, the North-South high-speed rail might stay a pipe dream for generations. It is going to take decades, if it ever happens at all. They have alienated every potential partner, demanded impossible terms, and shown zero credibility. Our strategy. Stay the course, hold the line, and do not give an inch. The moment we soften, we are on the hook for tens of billions with nothing to show for it. And that is a price nobody should be willing to pay. We have seen this movie before, and we know how it ends. All right, that is a wrap for today. Thanks for tuning in, and I will catch you next time.